Burgess and Bolton's weekly wrap-up.
So hello everybody and welcome to this week's edition of Burgess and Bolton's weekly wrap-up, where we look at everything to do with the London market, change, technology. This week it's super quick because you may have noticed that there was an announcement from Boris Johnson which has kind of thrown all our worlds a little bit upside down, which has meant we haven't got much time for this. But we are going to continue and give you a bit of a wrap up of what we found interesting this week. So let's.
We're just in bedrooms next door to one another, aren't we?
Yeah, that's it.
We're like Morecambe and Wise. We live in the same house, really.
Yeah, like the Beatles in the terraced house.
Yeah. Later on in the show, I'm going to pop my head in through the door behind Jeremy.
We look forward to seeing that.
I'm a lodger.
Let's talk about insurtechs. So, and this is really insurtech. So this is another confusing thing that really drives me crackers. The word insurtech is used for multiple different organizations, and I tend to use it as technology companies that have started up and have something to add to it. However, other press use it as insurance companies that are supposedly using technology to enable their business and operating model. So this is quite an interesting article that you found this week, Ben, about their IPOs not really delivering what was expected. And it's quite interesting.
Yeah, this is quite sobering, I think, for the so-called insurtech businesses. And if there's anything to go by, they won't be using that phrase soon because there won't be any investors in it. So there is an index that looks at this, and the FT has picked this up. So a basket of 22 insurtech IPOs this year has lost over 25% of its value. So they're really crashing and burning. And then some of the better known names, some of the bigger ones, like Hippo and Root has dropped 80% of its value. It's an auto insurer, motor insurer as we call it. And it was a $6.8 billion business. It was valued at a year or two ago. Wow. Hippo, another consumer personal lines business, actually, but it's I think it's mainly personal, is 60% down as well. So a lot of the VCs are moving out of these businesses. Obviously, they've taken a bit of a battering on it, and they're moving. Apparently, now obviously they need to invest a spread of portfolio, of course, but they're moving much more towards the traditional tech businesses where the returns have been tremendous. The place where I think the FT is suggesting they're going as well, someone in the FT article is suggesting they're going towards more commercial insurers, more towards that's where the money's going. So in other words, the more traditional, you might call them, people type businesses with perhaps better management, better underwriting and so on. That's my reading between the lines interpretation.
Yeah. And have you got a view on why the IPOs are disappointing? Is it that the basics just aren't there? What's your reading?
It's basics. They've put a lot of emphasis, these businesses, Lemonade's another of them, on the front end, really, the user experience, the consumer experience, and with that, I think quite a lot of the technology sits there, so they're easy to use interfaces and claims interfaces and so on, which we've all heard about and know about. But where obviously an insurance business really has to operate well is behind the scenes, I think, in terms of its underwriting. I mean, if there's anything, any lessons here, it's that underwriting really still matters, and human underwriting matters, because these are reliant on AI, so-called AI, these businesses. But obviously that's not working very well because the selection of risk is poor. They're getting heavily into areas which are risks, so the portfolio management appears to be weak. And I think it's probably true. I think someone says it in the article below that that because these are low capitalized businesses compared with the big carriers, they just don't have the punch, and they have their capital is quite expensive because they've got all sorts of co-relationships and reinsurance relationships, which they have to have because they're undercapitalized essentially. So it's an expensive business, probably. Maybe more expensive even some of those larger carriers. The tech isn't really working necessarily particularly to the advantage of reducing the underwriting cost in the business, which is where we know the problem is in insurance. So I think it's a very interesting. I think it's a very telling story about what still matters, which a lot of people are saying still is that it's about the quality of the underwriting. I've done, we've looked at a bit of research. What's the correlation, or quite a lot of research about correlations between good underwriting teams or people and success, and others have done this too. And the short story is, I think that one of the only correlations really is around experience of teams. How long they've been going. So in other words, there is a lot of long-term learning that goes on in these teams, I think, and experience building that seems to really matter when it comes to this. And I think that also begs the question of just how valuable is the insurance chain, because in some ways you could argue that when it works well, it does really get quite good at risk selection, or indeed deselecting kind of rubbish that you shouldn't touch,
Yeah.
And obviously these new businesses just don't have that experience.
And that's really interesting, just to kind of build on that point, because if you then take it back to, well, it's all about teams and your people and building that experience over time and a way of working and a way of looking at risks, then you're kind of going, well, in that context, the role of the office and having people together, collaborating, learning, and going, you can see the absolute value of that. And that's why I think I come back to my point that it isn't the end of the office. I think it will be something different, but I think that there's a lot of hype now about people working from home, but I just don't see it really. I really think
no. I think the other thing is succession as well, because I think the teams I tend to think of them in a way as aging rock bands, like the Rolling Stones, that are still playing to packed stages all around the world and making a lot of money out of it, in their twilight years. And that is kind of how underwriting teams, I think, work, is that they have a mix of skills and capabilities, some salespeople, a few technicals, kind of younger people coming through. And your point is well made, because I think that those teams are sort of honed and crafted in their relationships and how they learn the softer stuff, and what not to do and what to do. And I would say that does reflect all the research that we do. I think it's this silly notion really that somehow tech replaces people in these jobs. I just really do rail against that. And I know that some people will write, smart books about the fact that that's, naive and technology ultimately will take over. But to me, there's still too much evidence that isn't the case, and too many examples, where it isn't. It's still about the people and the quality of the people. And how do you teach AI to, what an underwriter who's been doing it for 20 years knows, and then with a team of people who interact, and they interact with brokers and they interact with MGAs, and and then people who are on the ground, the local people who know the businesses. There's this huge amount of soft, uncoded data that is in the industry that matters when you make these decisions.
Yeah, I do as well. I think the role, as we've said many times on this, is how technology is going to, support and enable those people to do their jobs better rather than replace. And
yeah, absolutely.
Good, excellent. So that's one piece, and then our other news story is connected with the big event of this week, which is the other big event, which is the Number 10 Downing Street party or non-party, Cheese and Business affair. And one of your friends got caught up in the
did
in it all, which is
so. Yeah, so this is a guy I was at university with, Ed Oldfield, who became a journalist. He's been a journalist for probably about 30 years. So he's there. He is. That's his mug shot there. And he's the story is he's obviously the guy who organised the party and did the special advisor in Downing Street. Was a guy called Ed Oldfield. Now, my Ed Oldfield, my mate, was identified by someone on Twitter as this person, obviously mistaken identity. So he is then caught in this storm for the first time in his life. So it's his 5 minutes of fame, basically. And he goes on to, to describe his experiences. He writes a good article on it about what happened to him over the few days. And his Twitter account went from, like about 2,000 to 200,000 views within a day, escalated. He then got various people, and he put out a statement. I'm just looking it up now. He put out a statement to say very clearly he's not Ed Oldfield, the special advisor to the cabinet, but he is in fact he says here, just to make something crystal clear tonight, I'm a journalist working in the West Country as a gender editor for Devon Live News, Plymouth Live and Cornwall Live. Those august publications, not the special advisor in Downing Street of the same name who appears in the leaked Christmas party video. So anyway, he makes it clear, but then lots of people still follow him up and chase him. And he said he'd already had a bad week because his basement of his house had been flooded in Storm Barra that week. So he'd had the problem there. And then he also says a rescue cat they shared an office with had to be put to sleep in his office, had to be put down. I'm not laughing about that, but just,
it's all context.
It's all in the context. And then, so then one of his colleagues writes, to be clear, it's not to be confused. This guy's not to be confused with our own Ed Oldfield of the Plymouth, whatever it is. Our Ed Oldfield is better and could probably drink the Downing Street under the table. Then people started to joke with him about it a bit. So he got a lot of. So the former Torbay MP and Councillor Adrian Sanders, who'd met my Ed, we'll call him, said, "I'm sorry, you would say that, wouldn't you? No one has seen you and the PM as advisor in the same place at the same time. I rest my case."
Yeah, the one that I liked the best was the tweet that just says, "Well, you should resign anyway." Yeah,
just resign anyway. You know, fall on your sword. There's no point. It doesn't matter whether you were there or not. And then it's someone said there's someone in Number 10 Downing Street who also keeps being mistaken for a prime minister. So the poor guy said, then he got the final kind of part of his story, which is quite good. He said he started hearing from other people who'd been mistaken. So there's a chap called James Cleverly, who also works in Parliament, but he's not the Conservative MP. He said, I know the feeling. And then another person called Karen Brady, who's not the Baroness and Football Club boss, says that she gets daily requests for football match tickets. It's such a good story, but he does say at the end, that in the end people were quite nice and they were quite pleasant. But he said, having been a journalist, he knows how these things operate. But when you're in the centre of it, he said it's a little bit kind of disconcerting.
What's interesting, I guess, what's interesting for us and the London market is if you look at the cyber policies that you've got out there, and a big part of those is actually dealing with the media frenzy that will happen when the story leaks, or journalists get hold of the story that your data's been hacked, and it's probably on the web. And I just kind of reflect back on the broadband provider. Who was it?
TalkTalk.
Yeah, TalkTalk. And the storm that lasted, it must have lasted at least a couple of weeks while they were trying to work out what data had been lost, whether it was sensitive credit card data, and of course they probably didn't know.
No.
But so it's really interesting just how quickly those stories get out and then have take on a life of their own, and dealing with them from a corporate point of view or a different point of view, it's really difficult.
I think so. I think you're right, Jeremy. It's the it's also the quantum of the response. So obviously my Ed in this case was quite quick to say I'm not that person, and he clearly isn't. And then, but you still have a few days, or a week nearly of that sort of you become the centre of attention, and and there are so many people who can just add a comment, and I think it's. Then you imagine if you actually have a problem, then it's, and you're trying to scramble to fix it. It's, as you say, it's very, it must be incredibly stressful, really. And I can get it. Yeah.
There we are. Very good. Right. We did say it was going to be quick this week. So let's move things. So I've actually got a tip for everyone. I don't know if you've seen, Ben, the new documentary by Peter Jackson on the Beatles.
I haven't seen it. I've read about it.
It is extraordinary. It's unbelievable for a number of reasons. Firstly, because the quality of the film has been restored, that it looks like it's just been shot on HD like last week.
Yeah.
The Beatles themselves are just incredible, and the insight is just amazing. And it's not depressing at all. It's a very good watch, and the central bit that you just see that one of the, I'm not going to spoil it by saying what it is, but one of the their best known songs, I mean, you just see it evolve from a few strums on a guitar into what we all know and love. And it's so funny watching it, because you're kind of going, no, don't play it like that. Play it like this. It's like that. It's absolutely brilliant. Yeah, well worth watching.
I'll watch that. Yeah. I've read fantastic reviews of that, and I think it's sort of amazing that these things are sort of they don't come to light until now. They've been around. I think there's a film on Netflix last year called Summer of Soul, which I watched during lockdown, which was about a festival in New York that actually happened about the same time as Woodstock, but it had just all the main, black musicians, artists over about a week and a half. And the film is fantastic, and it's just amazing who's on it, and it's a fantastic show or shows. And you can't quite understand why it has never been shown or aired, because it's just so incredible. And of course there's kind of accusations that it's kind of about racism, which may well be a bit true, but I think it's also not just that. I think it's about the things that capture the imagination, and everything else gets forgotten. Because Woodstock was the thing. Woodstock was kind of a surprise. It caught the imagination, and then I think it just did, and then it I suppose you can't show two massive shows on something and then suddenly everybody's passed it by and the world moves on, So it's all ephemera in the end, isn't it?
I guess so. I don't know what that means.
Transient of its moment stuff, ephemera. There you go. You can look that up. You can look that up later on. Word of the week.
Word of the week. I've got a fanfare. Word of the week.
That's it. Word of the week. I'll do another one next week then.
Yeah. Next week's our Christmas special, Christmas quiz. So tune in, take part, and drop out. Or whatever they said at Woodstock. Sounds good. Right. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We will see you next week for the Christmas special and the end of year wrap up. But enjoy the weekend, everyone. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Stay safe. Bye.
Burgess and Bolton's weekly wrap up.